So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us back again this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. We have an interesting session lined up for you. This time we are switching gears to talk about climate change from very interesting perspectives, one from Ghana and one from India. We have just two panelists today. So that gives us a little bit of time, and hopefully we can have some nice discussion as well at the end. So let me start with our first presenter, King Carl Tornam Duho. I hope I have pronounced that correctly. Is joining us from Ghana. He is a CIMA qualified accountant and ACCA prize winner, award-winning reviewer, and an economic consultant with experience in academia, business, and public policy. He is currently an IMF Youth Fellow and a past fellow to the World Group Youth Summit. He has consulted for UNICEF, GIZ, the Royal Netherlands Embassy, Plan International, Development Reimagined, and Imani. King runs a startup, Dataking Consulting, and this has been engaged, and he has been engaged as a finance researcher by the AERC as well. He has published over 15 peer-reviewed journal articles and over 15 policy working papers. He holds a master's degree, and his research combines the broad areas of economics, finance, accounting, and public policy with the aim of solving international development issues. In this case, climate change. So I'll turn over to you, King Carl. You have, if you can stay within 12 minutes, maximum 15 for the initial presentation, that would be good. Okay, if you press the reading mode or share your full screen, then we can see the full screen of the presentation.
Can you see my full screen now?
We can see your screen, but the presentation itself, we can see it in outline mode, not the presentation mode, if you know what I mean.
Yes. Let me try it again.
So you can click on that book at the bottom, the reading mode. That should do it.
Has it come now?
It still looks the same. I mean, it's visible.
Okay, I'm coming. Let me try it again.
Okay. Or when you press share screen, choose not window, but full screen.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you, I'll do that. Is it okay now?
Excellent, and the floor is yours.
Okay, sure. Thank you very much, and thank you for GDN and Campbell Corporation for organizing this program. My name is King Carl Tornam Duho. I currently run a small startup involved in research on Africa and Asian issues and focusing on the global south. And we have been researching on the issue about climate change over the past 1 year. We did a couple of book chapters on it. And one of the areas is on the mining sector and how they are reporting these issues in the African continent. Today, I'll present briefly on the determinants of climate change reporting among mining firms in Africa. We are still exploring. So the analysis I did, I ended up incorporating some of the data sets from the oil and gas industry as well. So kind of the results are consistent for what is we see in the mining sector and then what we see in the oil and gas. So I combine it, then the analysis is a bit broader, but the points are consistent. So for us to have some discussions around those issues. This is the outline of the presentation, very briefly. But before I start, these are some exhibits of various frameworks that try to guide how climate change should be disclosed and should be reported and should be accounted for. The IFRS, which is the Accounting International Financial Reporting Standard, have been guiding pure financial information reporting and disclosure practices over the years. But we now realize that there's a need for the inclusion of non-financial issues which have financial implications. And climate change is one of those. But you see that there are some additional institutions like the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, which have been working with institutions like the IMF and other organizations to try to frame the various disclosure practices with regards to these climate change related issues. Then also we have the Global Reporting Initiative, which tries to develop various frameworks. We have the GRI 200, GRI 300, GRI 400, which all have individual standards under them. And for the climate change one falls under the GRI 300, which is the green, and it connects to the environmental issues. We have the Climate Disclosure Standards Board, which is also involved in one leg of the work. So you see that recently there have been some integration, trying to see how institutions can integrate. And there are some efforts between the integrated thinking principles, integrated reporting framework, and then the SASB, which is the Sustainable Accounting Standard Board. They are trying to form kind of a value reporting foundation that combines their effort. But I see recently the Pure Accounting Standard Regulator, which is the IFRS, also started making comments about how to start discussions about climate change. The point is that climate change is very key. The recent IPCC report indicated that there are 3 factors that are key, and one of them is that human beings' activity has affected the climate significantly. Previously, there were arguments that are so strong against this whole climate change issue, but now people are becoming awake, and the governments are getting a bit more proactive, but not so much yet. Action is still needed. And you see that in the corporate report of the various firms, they are trying to inculcate some of these frameworks because they are multiple, because they are many. Reporting on these frameworks also try to kind of follow an eclectic view where they use various standards. So you see that this is an exhibit of one of the African firms which we collected the data on. It's on Goldfields. It's a mining firm, and you see that they have the SDGs even inculcated in the report. So they have an SDG, then they have the GRI, which is the Global Reporting Initiative. They have even the United Nations Compact. They have the SASB. They are trying to see how all of them can connect. Because for policymakers, some of them are interested in the SASB, some of them are interested in the UNGC, some of them are interested in the GRI, some of them are interested in the SDG. And action is needed in all of this. So they are trying to do as much as possible to report on these things. You see consistent over here. But you see that the whole motivation for this study that we had was that climate change is a critical risk. It's a financial risk. It's a health risk. It has multiple risks that we have to address. And the definition by the UNFCCC on climate change is there, not disputed. And then there have also been evidence that spanning from 2010 to 2019 alone was the warmest, was one of the warmest. And you see that 2019 was found to be the second warmest year since the 1880s, aside from 2016. So you see that recent action by both the government, both the companies that are involved in some of the activities that are heavy on the climate emissions, have also contributed significantly. And you see that during 2020, when COVID set in, there were reports that the emissions declined a bit. But after there was a kind of a pickup globally, you see that the disclosure issue, the emissions still increased. You see that Africa is so critical in some of this. If you see the heat map on the heat waves that will affect the world, Africa, especially Southern Africa, will be so much affected. There are impacts of climate change like climate violence, violence that are linked to climate. People are dying because of climate, and the impact will be devastating. If we talk about poverty, eradicating it, we cannot do this without addressing climate change. And Africa is key. But the energy and mining sectors, which are heavy on kind of extractive industries, are massive when it comes to emission of carbon dioxide, methane, and then other greenhouse gases. So for us, for our end, we see that it is very critical to explore how these environmentally sensitive industries are disclosing. We are not saying that disclosure is enough. People are greenwashing these days, where firms report that they are doing well on climate change, but actually action is not on the ground. But one end of the coin is what? Disclosure. And then the other one will be whether they are actually reducing that, because they will aim for legitimacy. And if we achieve the disclosure, then the next time we ensure the assurance is key. Whether KPMG, PwC, Deloitte, or Ernst and Young, which are accounting assurance service firms, whether they are giving assurance to some of these climate change disclosures is another aspect. But the first one is that, are the firms ready to disclose? And the question is that, what are the factors that are driving firms in disclosing? The firms that are disclosing in Africa, what are the factors driving them? The aim of the study is to explore the extent to which the disclosure is among the energy and mining firms, and then also to explore the determinants of this climate change disclosure or reporting among the energy and mining firms. And the study tried to look at an institutional theory perspective, trying to look at the institutional factors that could drive it. But these factors could be it's firm based, it could be industry based, and then it could also be national based or global forces. So we try to conceptualize that very well. The study tried to look at data from 2006 to 2019, private sector focus especially, and then we explored 220 corporate reports of these firms across board. And the data is heavy on firms that are reporting with the GRI. So we look at the GRI database so that we know that these firms are committed somehow to the GRI, and then how they are reporting. So you see that the reportage is a bit high. The reportage may be high, but it does not mean that that is the general picture. That is the picture of this data set that we have picked, which is firms that are kind of aligned to the disclosure. And then we use content analysis. We got data from Libya, Mauritius, Morocco, Nigeria, South Africa. And these firms do significant activities in these industries. And the point is that when we talk about South Africa like this, the firms in the South Africa data set have mining resources, reserves in other countries. For example, Goldfield has some in Ghana. So the reports from South Africa do not actually mean that that's all, it's just South Africa involved. There are multiple countries in some of these contexts that are involved. We look at the corporate governance factors, we look at the other firm factors, and then we look at some of the macroeconomic factors also. How are they going on? How are they going down when it comes to climate change? Now, the SDG 13 is on climate action, which is on climate change. But when we look at and when we talk about the SDG is kind of the UN sanctioned approach to this whole sustainability concept. But there is also a corporate sanction one, which is the ESG, so environmental, social, and governance indicators or framework. And the GRI, which is the Global Reporting Initiative, try to follow these kind of three approaches: environmental, social, and then try to look at the economic aspects of issues. And the emissions is under the climate change, which is on the climate change. It's GRI 305. It's a full standard that tries to guide how the firms to report, what they should report, and there are 7 key indicators when it comes to this. These are the indicators. We have the direct or scope 1, which is the scope 1 greenhouse gas emissions. We have the energy indirect scope 2. We have the other indirect scope 3. We have the greenhouse gas emission intensity. And then we have the reduction of the greenhouse gas emission. We have emissions of ozone depleting substances, nitrogen oxides, and other significant emissions. So from the 1 to 7 are the indicators that we have. But in this study, what we did is to compute kind of an index that tried to sum up all these indicators. What's the percentage for each firm that they are disclosing? And in reporting, all these indicators have to be measured. Some of them are mathematical things. You have to measure. You have to do climate assessment, climate impact assessment, and all of those things. And the firms need kind of resources and then the expertise also to do some of these things. What's the methodology? The methodology tries to look at all these factors. We develop an index. And then we look at how board size, board independence, the type of firm, the firm size, industry, cross-listing on various stock markets, United Nations Global Compact membership of the firm, then the Human Development Index of the country, and the GDP growth of the country, how all of these things are affecting the climate change disclosure. We look at various studies to ensure that our approach is quality. So these are the statistics. I just want to show the summary table. You see that the disclosure on direct scope 2 greenhouse gas emission, which is a bit simple, is more, and followed by the indirect, and then followed by the other indirect. But the least disclosed is the greenhouse gas emission intensity. which was kind of a newer concept that has been discussed, but it's not so much disclosed that way. So these are some of the extent to which the disclosure is happening across board. Beside that, we try to run a number of regression because of time. These are the results, but I just want to look at the final result that we saw so far. So the conclusion that we got was that we saw that the firms that have large board size tend to have reporting higher. So those that do have more people on the corporate board tend to have the reporting. We are suspecting, although we didn't test that statistically because of the lack of data, that this could be driven by the fact that the broader, the bigger the board size, the more diverse the people that come on the board. And because they are diverse, they may share ideas, and then some of them will drive the need for some of these sustainability issues. And then also we saw that the board independence increases climate change reporting. And board independence means that people that are executive directors, they are non-executive directors, those who are on the board but not part of the day-to-day management of the firm. When there are many, we see that the climate change disclosure is high. And some of these people are picked because of the expertise in global, in understanding global trends and all of that. So because of that, the higher the board independence, we see that disclosure is high in that. We also saw that disclosure is irrespective of the size or classification of the firms, in that multinationals are even small firms tend to even disclose as much as multinationals. So there's no clear significant impact that these are multinationals. Because of that, they have impact from the international office. So because of that, they are disclosing more. Even smaller firms are involved, and that's good to hear. And this policy should be driven that way, so that SMEs even should be able to be involved in this whole climate change disclosure, and then the action that is needed at the firm level. We also saw that when we look at the impact of size, while larger firms tend to kind of disclose more, the larger the size, when the firms become so large, it tends to rather diminish the disclosure. And we suspect that that could be driven by the fact that at that level, the legitimacy is gained by those firms already, and then disclosure may not be so critical for them. Not that it's not so critical, but disclosing also comes with a lot of cost, and then sometimes the dynamics, the firms may not be disclosing as much as possible. But one of the surprising results we got was on cross-listing. We expected, hypothesized that cross-listed firms, because they are listed on various stock markets, should be able to take the best practices. Like some firms are listed on Ghana stock market, on New York stock market, on London stock market, and then listed on Johannesburg stock market. They have good practices. For example, Johannesburg stock market has better practices than the Ghana stock market. So we expect that firms that are cross-listed should be able to do better and disclose more. But surprisingly, such firms rather do not disclose more on climate change issues. Then we saw a significant impact of the United Nations Global Compact. There are 10 principles on sustainable business practices that firms and corporate leaders agreed on. And then it is called the United Nations Global Compact. We saw that the firms that referred significantly to that compact in the corporate report tend to disclose more. And also we saw that the countries that have high human development index tend to disclose more. And you see, high human development index means that the education level is good and the health systems are good. Climate change is a health problem. So if you are committed to your human development, you should be able to commit to climate change also. And also education is key for firms to act. When the people are educated, they'll be able to act easily. Then GDP growth. We saw that GDP growth rather reduces climate change disclosure. Well, that means our current GDP is not a green GDP. It is not the right measure of actual GDP. Because it doesn't consider the externalities like the climate change, which we are talking about. And there are various calls for us to rethink the whole GDP and then try to look at it and make it greener. The implications of this study are that the corporate board and C-suites in general can take QQ from some of these. How do they composite the board size and the board independence in regard to these climate change issues? Then also, beside the disclosure, there's the need for actual action in reduction of the net emissions. Then also, we saw that the United Nations Global Compact is a multi-stakeholder initiative. So we need more multi-stakeholder approach in addressing this climate change issue. So civil society should be involved, government should be involved, the development organizations, IMF, World Bank, the UN, all of them should be involved in all of this. And then the various corporate actors should act. And we see that the 10 principles of the United Nations Global Compact are key. Not just that, all the other the SDG, all of them should be embraced. And the action is needed from international intergovernmental organizations, multilateral development organizations, the regional and national policymakers, and then civil society and policy think tanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, King Carl, and thank you so much also for staying within the time limit. Very, very interesting presentation. I just reminded people that they can post their questions in the Q&A tab. I don't see any for the moment, so I'm going to take the chair privilege and ask you a couple before we then turn to Laden, and then there may be more at the end for both of you. So one question is, you show the mix of factors that influence reporting and disclosure, some that are sort of within the purview of the firm itself, and some that are country level variables, right?
Yes.
Including, well, as captured in the Human Development Index or GDP growth and so on and so forth. I'm wondering though, from a regulatory perspective, are there any incentives or penalties for not reporting or disclosing? Can we sort of influence the level of disclosure and reporting that way as well? Is it mandatory in some places? Is it not? And what happens if you do or if you don't? Are there any consequences other than perhaps the board putting pressure? From a regulatory perspective, are there any such incentives or penalties that you came across in the countries that you looked at?
Okay. Yeah. So in the various countries that I looked at, and actually across the African continent, the Environmental Protection Agency or authority in such countries tried to look at some of these issues, and but none of them has kind of mandatory requirement on disclosing climate change yet. So there's no punishment for it. And as it is now, the only punishment that can be meted out can only come from the market. If only the various consumers and the various end users of the product will be able to be climate sensitive and then be able to act to purchase the environmentally friendly products as against the non-environmentally friendly. But as it is now, there's no requirement that way. There are arguments for and against mandatory or voluntary disclosure practices across the world, and not just in Africa, in the Western world also. The positives are there, and then the negatives are there too. But the point is that for the mining and the extractive industry, we do not see that yet. And in actual fact, the various regulatory institutions that are connected to the extractive industry, like the OPEC, if it is the oil, or the extractive industry transparency international initiative, they don't have that kind of stringent principle on such disclosures yet. But for me personally, I don't see maybe a mandatory. Mandatory would be, well, just to nudge them, try to engage them. But a voluntary disclosure would help us all. Because, well, as for the accounting aspect, where the IFRS, the National Financial Reporting Standards Board, is coming in trying to do kind of start discussion. For the IFRS, is known for its kind of mandatory requirements. Even if we are able to achieve the mandatory requirements, we still need an action that is firm driven, that is based on sustainable principles, so that we don't end up achieving a box-ticking kind of objective, because the firms can always get their ways around. But if they want a business model that is based on sustainability, that understands the need to take climate action, then that will help us all. And you see, for the African context, a lot of these mining and oil and gas industries are operating, and the impact on the environment, the impact on the climate, on the pollution of the various areas, that communities that they operate, is so serious. But the action just have to be taken as much as possible. So there needs to be a balance. But as governments are being called upon, there may be regulations, there may be laws, and that may come up. There was a data set of various country databases that was built by the Greatham Institute. It tried to look at the various laws and regulations in the various countries in Africa on policies, all of that, and they found out that much significant portion of the requirements on these climate change issues in the African context are that's at the government level, are kind of government policies, but not laws. So they are not kind of law, the acts of parliament yet. So significant number of them are not kind of acts of parliament. You see, South Africa was able to enact a kind of a carbon tax recently, kind of carbon tax act that tried to guide how some of those things work. So these things are new. There's a need for research first, then there's a need for policy advice that will help us all together. Thank you.
Very good points indeed. I'll leave you with another question to which we can come back towards the end of the panel after we hear from Laden as well. But one thing that I found interesting in your results was the link between the GDP growth and again, the level of reporting or disclosure of the firms. And in countries with higher GDP growth, there was less reporting. And I wanted you to perhaps unpack that a little bit more for us. Actually, why don't you take that now, and then we can come back at the end with other questions.
Yeah, I can take it, right? Yeah, sure. So, well, recently we did our lab. We did a research on co-financing in Africa, and we tried to look at how China is financing coal plants in Africa. The pollution is so significant. The impact is so significant. But when South Africa is not having the electricity, it will affect the economy. And when that impact happens, it means that their GDP will be affected. What South Africa will end up doing is to move on with the climate insensitive actions, climate insensitive investment. And because the current measure of GDP is climate insensitive, we'll see that South Africa will have a high GDP growth. However, the action on climate change is not that good. So we see that not just at the national level, but the firm level too. A lot of the entire business processes of firms are not climate sensitive. If they are not climate sensitive, it means that whilst we are trying to achieve higher profits, and then that will impact the GDP of the country, you end up not acting well when it comes to climate change. You end up not performing well. And some firms, because their performance on climate change may not be good, they'll end up not disclosing. Because if you are not performing well, the market is comparing your performance last year as to your performance this year. When it's declining, that can affect you. So some of them will tend to not disclose. So some of those things are some of the things driving. What it means is that we don't want kind of the advice is not that countries should not have high GDP growth so that they will disclose more. That's not the advice. The advice is that the entire GDP, the entire business practice, the entire economic system should be changed to be climate sensitive. And when we say being climate sensitive, we don't want kind of a climate action in silo. We want all the business processes, including the extraction of inputs, including processing of the input, including refining it, including transporting it to the end user. The entire value chain should be climate sensitive. And the moment we do that, then we'll see a better impact of how the GDP affects the disclosure practices. Thank you.
So much. So we move on to Laden Lama. Laden, try and put your camera on. Okay, maybe you cannot, but you can share your screen. Okay, that's fine. And if we can see the full view of the presentation, that would be even better. So choose full screen rather than window, or go to presentation mode. But let me introduce you first before you start. So Ladenda has completed her master's from Sikkim University in India, and is now and her MPhil from the Center for Development Studies at the Jawaharlal Nehru University in India. Her dissertation looks at the impact of sanitary and phytosanitary measures, a case study of Indian tea industry. And she's now working on her thesis at the Center for Development Studies of JNU in Trivandrum, where she's pursuing her PhD. The thesis is Low Carbon Energy Industries in India, a study of solar photovoltaics and wind turbine manufacturing industries. And I think what she's going to share with us today is part of her thesis. Nadanda, you have the floor. Please take around 12 minutes.
Thank you, ma'am. A very good afternoon to everyone present here. Ma'am, is the slides visible?
Yes, it's still not on full view mode though.
Okay, I have done that. Okay, I'll try once again.
When you share, choose full screen rather than window. When you go to share screen, it gives you multiple windows. Choose the one on the left, which tells you to share full screen.
Okay.
Then it should work better. And
is it visible?
Perfect. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, so I am going to share a part of my thesis study over here, and my topic is impact of government incentive policies on the investment on renewable energy in India, a comparative analysis of solar photovoltaic and wind turbine industries. Now, my study will first I will be sharing the background of the studies, the research questions and data and methodology, the policies at the international as well as the national level, then the production of electrical equipments, especially related to solar photovoltaic and wind turbines, and the relationship between public investment, installed capacity of renewable energy, and production of electrical equipment, and then lastly the conclusion. Okay, so starting with the background of the study, we see that climate change has become one of the most pressing issue in today's world, which requires global cooperation. Over the past centuries, there has been a consistent increase in the concentration of carbon dioxide in the ecosystem, which is mostly caused by anthropogenic activities like burning of fossil fuels, deforestation, burning of biomass, resulting in climate change. India's contribution to total carbon emission has increased from 1.55% in 1978 to 7% in just 4 decades. And this makes India the third largest carbon generator after China and United States. Despite contributing to less than 10% of carbon emitted globally, India is most vulnerable to the impact of climate change. The Global Climate Risk Index, released at the 23rd Conference of Parties of the United Nations Framework of Climate Change, showed that developing countries like India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh are the most vulnerable. Given India's dependence on climate-sensitive factors like agriculture, which accounts for a major portion of its GDP, coupled with its low financial adaptive capacity, etc., has intensified its vulnerability. It has thus been projected that climate change would have unblemished impact on India's development. Now, environmental sustainability has therefore become a key focus in the policy agenda, not only at the global level but also at the national level. Uh, And policies are introduced not only to address the condition of environment, but the powers across the world have been striving towards addressing most polluting sectors like energy, industry, agriculture, and mobility. Efforts are being made to reduce and prevent the release of greenhouse gases by making old equipment more efficient in terms of energy use, changing consumer behavior, and using renewable energies and new technologies. As Sir King Carl has also mentioned in his presentation, that energy and mining sectors are the largest contributors of carbon. I will be dealing with one of the sectors, that is the energy sector. Now, this study, it mainly tries to answer the following questions. First is, what has been the institutional architecture developed globally and at the national level for the advancement of low carbon energy, and how has India responded to these changes, and how has the photovoltaic and wind turbine industries evolved in India? Now, data and methodology. The study has utilized data from International Renewable Energy Agency and CMIE data database PROVIS, and the study period is 2000 to 2018, and it has used simple statistical methods to analyze the data. Now, climate change mitigation, if we see at the international level, the table shows various steps which have been taken since 1988 in order to deal with the problems related to climate change, with the setting up of IPCC for providing scientific information for developing policies related to mitigation of climate change, to the United Nations Framework for Convention on Climate Change, Kyoto Protocol, etc., all focused on obliging the countries to endorse the agreements and protocols in order to stabilize the emission of greenhouse gases and follow the path of low carbon. These institutions and agreements were mostly guided by the aim of reducing the intensity of carbon, which would help combat the climate change. The move towards the process of mitigation of climate change, it started by providing scientific information which would help the government formulate climate policies. Then came other agreements with the intention to reduce the emission of greenhouse gases and then help promote clean form of energy. The initiative of reducing greenhouse gases and promoting cleaner forms of energy was further boosted by the introduction of Sustainable Development Goals during 2015. Now, among the other aims of providing basic facilities like safe water and sanitation, electricity, adequate nutrition, etc., environmental sustainability was its second pillar. Now, these goals, it aimed towards low carbon energy system, and hence the two goals, 7 and 3, which promotes affordable, clean, and sustainable energy for all, and investment in low carbon development initiatives, respectively. Now, this encouraged the increase in the share of renewable energy in the energy mix and increase in the investment in renewable energy technologies. Now, we come like respond in response to various agreements and protocols at international level, and India being a signatory of these agreements, these were the steps which were taken at the national level by India. The need for self-sufficiency of energy was already recognized during the twin oil crisis during 1970s, and its necessity acted as the main driver of introduction of renewable energy. So it was not only because of the agreements and protocols which were at the international level, but it had started recognizing the importance of renewable energy since the 1970s. Okay, then however, it was only during the seventh five-year plan that a non-banking financial company in the form of IREDA was established, which mostly made provisions to support schemes and projects under the energy generation financially. This step of promoting energy generation via renewable energy was undertaken by India much before the introduction of IPCC at the international level. Then, with the key goal of stabilizing the greenhouse gases, the UNFCCC during the early 90s called for cooperation and participation of all the nations leading legally binding commitments like clean development mechanisms, etc., on industrialized nations and economies were operationalized. Uh, then India also ratified to the protocol during 2002 and set up designated national Authority to participate in CDM project. Then this initiative boosted the production of energy using non-conventional sources further, especially the solar and wind energy. Then during 1992 to 2007, the government encouraged and initiated the private sector participation, especially for the transmission and distribution of energy. Then the policies were framed to support private developers to set up power projects, with more emphasis being laid on these renewable energy sources. Now, during this period, emphasis was laid on electrifying villages, special action plan, then the village energy security, etc. And this period also witnessed the introduction of Electricity Act. In the year 2003, then the policies outlined under the Act provided a roadmap for boosting the share of renewable energy in the total electricity generated. Then there were other important policy measures following the Electricity Act, like the central government then formulated the national uh, electricity policy in the year 2005, and in consultation with the state government and central electricity authority, and these policies, they laid guidelines for accelerating the development of the power sector. Then came the rural electrification policy, which aimed at providing rural electrification, and then it was followed by the integrated energy policy. Then the policies undertaken during this period had more market-oriented framework and hence created demand for energy generation. This era therefore saw the emergence of non-conventional energy sources and the integration of renewable energy in the electricity system in order to meet the growing demand of electricity. The government then announced the tariff policy in continuation with the national electricity policy, which laid down provisions for renewable energy. And it said that a minimum percent of energy was to be purchased from these sources, and the percentage was to be determined by the State Electricity Regulatory Commission. Then the beginning of the 11th five-year plan saw the introduction of NEPCC, which focused on energy security and its sustainability. It comprised of 8 major missions, among which some of which focused on the power sectors were like the National Solar Mission, which is now known as the Jawaharlal Nehru National Solar Mission. Then which increased these this mission was mostly aimed at promoting and developing solar energy, and then came the national mission for enhanced energy efficiency and national mission on sustainable habitat. The National Solar Mission, it was one of the largest initiative taken by the government, and it aimed to provide the development of solar energy for generating power, and it focused on large scale deployment of both grid and off grid solar plants. Having been revised twice, it targets at 100 gigawatts of solar PV by the year 2022. Now, addition to that, the Reserve Bank of India in 2020 revised the guidelines for priority sector lending in order to allow better penetration of the credit into credit deficient areas. Apart from increasing grants to the weaker section like small and marginal farmers and health and infrastructure, renewable energy was a sector which was included in the priority sector. Under this, the bank would provide loans up to 30 crore Indian rupees for the purpose of windmills, biomass-based and solar-based power generations, micro-hydel power plants, non-conventional energy-based public utilities. Now, the government of India has now outlined an action plan to achieve a total capacity of 60 gigawatt from hydropower, 114 gigawatt from solar power, 67 gigawatt from wind power, 10 from biomass, and 5 from small hydropower, thus aiming to achieve a total of around 225 gigawatt of renewable energy capacity by the end of 2022, which is much ahead of its target of 175 gigawatt as per the Paris Agreement. This is proving to be a major thrust for the sector, as the market players have enough incentive to move to clean source. This in return is encouraging investment in the renewable energy sector. Now, according to the analytics firm British Business Energy, India has ranked third globally in terms of its renewable energy investment in 2020. The table over here shows the compound annual growth rate of the public investment in renewable energy, installed capacity, and the renewable energy, total energy generated. Now, it can be observed that the investment has been growing over the years, and during 2015 to 18, the growth rate of investment has reached 21.31%. With the growth in the investment, the total capacity installed has also been growing along with the energy generated. Now, this shows the production of solar modules and wind turbines in India. With the increase in public investment in renewable energy, there is an increase in installment of more capacities, and thus we see there is demand for these electrical equipment, especially solar photovoltaic and wind turbines. And therefore we also see that from year 2000 we see that there is a slight increase, though there are many ups and downs. There has been an increase in the production of solar modules and wind turbines. Now, over here we see the CAGR of production of wind turbines and solar PV. It can be observed that there has been a positive growth in the production of solar photovoltaic and wind turbines. However, for wind turbines, the growth has been negative since 2010. This may be because there is more demand in the import of wind turbines. Now, this table shows the correlation between total public investment on renewable energy, the renewable energy installed capacity, and total renewable energy generated. It can be seen that the renewable energy generated is and the capacity installed are highly correlated with the investment. That is, as the investment is increasing, the capacity, the installed capacity and generation is also increasing side by side. Here we see a correlation between the investment, the installed capacity, the energy generated, and the production of solar modules and appliances. And the table 7 below shows the uh, same but with the production of wind turbines. Over here, we see that the investment on solar energy, the public investment on solar energy is highly significant. Okay, and with like the production, like it is highly correlated and it's highly significant with the production of solar uh, photovoltaics, which implies that as the investment is increasing, it is creating as an incentive for production of more modules and solar appliances. Okay, but however, we see that the investment in energy, wind energy, public investment in wind energy is not very significant. It may be because there is more demand for wind turbines which are imported. Okay, and recently when I went for a field work in Kanyakumari, which is situated in Tamil Nadu, the southernmost district of India. So there, I was just asking like about from where do they get their wind turbines and whatever the small electrical equipments, and also they were saying they get imported as well as domestically produced, but the imported ones were uh, of better quality. So hence maybe I'm assuming that since the demand for imported ones are more, the production of wind turbines is not very significant. The relation between the investment in the wind energy. So from here we mostly from the study we see that there have been various agreements and protocols introduced at the international level to help in the mitigation of climate change. Then India is also being a signatory of the agreements, have taken various steps to endorse the agreements. And even though the need for energy self-sufficiency and importance of renewable energy was realized as early as the 70s during the twin oil crisis, the government has been taking steps to promote renewable energy, and various steps taken like and various action plans which the government have targeted at have encouraged huge investments in renewable energy sources. And the increasing investment has thus led to increase in installations of renewable energy capacities, and hence in the demand for electrical equipment like wind turbines and solar modules and appliances have increased. Thus, can say that in one way, the production of these electrical equipments are demand oriented. That is, the government is introducing various policies to boost renewable energy sources, which is increasing the investment in it, and in turn, it is increasing the installed capacities, and hence, this is leading to an increase in demand for the electrical equipments like solar uh, modules and appliances and wind turbines. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Laden. So we've had now a presentation from India, which I think is a very nice complement to King Carl's presentation. And we did also see a few factors relating to international agreements, also regulation at the national level in the Indian context, as well as market factors. So we have a little bit of time left for questions. I see somebody who is asking to come onto the screen to perhaps ask a question. So I'm going to allow that. Dorica Jeremiah, you can ask your question. And we also have one in the Q&A section. No. Okay, I don't see Dorica now. She or he had requested to come onto the screen. Okay, let's go to the one that is there in the Q&A section. It's actually addressed to King. If you want to put your camera back on. The question says, thank you for your presentation. What is the best strategy or way to finance climate crisis? Where do you see the role of multilateral development banks? So it's a bit of a general question, but here it goes.
Yeah, well, I have been, I'm currently an IMF youth fellow, and our work has tried to look at the various economic issues across board, involvement of central banks in the various countries, and then how to inculcate climate change issues in all of those things. The point is that we need significant political will, because the things are we have to reorient the whole system. We have to rethink the whole system, and the action will demand so much. But the multilateral organizations and then the various development corporations, they need to be paramount. We see that the World Bank, the IMF, African Development Bank over here, they are doing a couple of things, but we still need more action. First is that we need significant research in some of these things, because what is happening is that for Africa, a lot of the things are what is being researched in Europe and then the US, and then it's just applied directly over here. So sometimes when we try to do something, I've worked in a policy think tank, when we try to do that, what happens is that it is very difficult, because there were some systems, there were some conditions in Europe or in Americas that makes them to be able to apply whatever recommendation they had. Then we are coming to jump ahead without setting the first steps. So for us, what it means is that that's why it's not good to see sustainability in silo. You cannot look at the SDG just looking at SDG 30, which is on climate action. You have to look at all of them, because if one is not done, the other cannot be achieved. So multilateral organizations need to act significantly, and we need more dialogue, involvement of various stakeholders. How is the think tanks being involved? The think tanks are involved a lot. They push a lot of the local policies. So these organizations have to involve them. How are the youth involved? The youth will be affected significantly, and their role is paramount. So how is the youth involved in some of those activities? How is the research institutions involved? So all of those things are needed. But the financing too have to be pegged. when we are talking about the SDRs, when we are talking about the various financing initiatives that are there, how are they linked up with sustainability and climate change issues? When it happens that way, then it means that the system will be able to be corrected. And then the banking system, how is it correcting the impact on climate? Are the climate friendly loans better than the non-climate friendly ones? So some of those things are some of the things that are still paramount. So the action is key. We are way behind, and we have to act as early as possible. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. Question for Laden. I wanted to ask you if you could comment a little bit on how the field work that you've been able to recently conduct has complemented the desk review and all of the quantitative analysis that you had done. What in what ways, and perhaps what did it add to your study, or did it make you change any of the earlier working assumptions?
Yes, ma'am. It did make me. I had theoretically, when I was studying, it was showing that these investment and all, they are boosting the installed capacity and the power generation and all. But when I went to the field, I was actually able to go only to the wind farm. So I was asking about the investment from the government side, and the various incentives provided by the government. But yes, I came to know that there were incentives earlier. Nowadays there are no incentives, so how much ever investment they have to do, it is done by themselves. But like what is happening is there is a lot of profit, so that is being able to sustain the wind farm. But as of government incentives and all these policies, they are only in the documents, and it's not very practical.
Got it.
So yeah, so
One
it has changed my perspective.
Very interesting. One more question for you. It has come in the Q&A. Are there regional figures for investments in the uptake of renewable energy in India, photovoltaics versus wind turbines?
Regional figures.
So not just at the national level, at least that's how I'm interpreting it.
No. There are no figures for at regional levels. I just got it from this investment. I got it from this international website. So there is only this national investment available.
Got it. Do the two of you have any questions for each other or reactions? And if not, are there any other questions from the audience? I found a point in your presentation, King Carl, about the size of the board and the independence of the board incredibly interesting. And how firms with larger boards and more independent also tend to do more reporting. That's certainly something that is worth looking into.
Yeah.
All right, so if there are no more questions, I want to thank you both very much for your presentations. It's obviously a critical topic for us worldwide, and it was interesting to hear two presentations on the topic, both from Africa, which again covered multiple countries across the continent, and a continent where indeed there is a lot of mining and a lot of pollution and drastic need for climate change action, and one from in India, where there seems to be increasing investment in renewable energy sources, and it's interesting to unpack that further and see where is it coming from and what's the role of the market versus international regulation versus investments at the national level. So I want to wish you both all the best in pursuing this further. It sounds like it's something that you will obviously continue to work on, and to Ladenla in her PhD. And to remind everybody that during the break, we have a 15-minute break now, and then the next set of sessions will start. You can go to the expo area and visit the various booths and vote on your favorite poster, for example, from those exhibited at the conference. And today is a pretty packed day in terms of the schedule. So there will be another set of parallel sessions after this short 15-minute break on private sector development and on social science research systems in Southeast Asia and the impact of COVID-19 on them. And then later on, a rapid fire session on a variety of topics, and then climate change again, evidence curation and climate change. How do we use the evidence for climate change finance and action? So that may be of particular interest for people who are in this session right now. And then we have a plenary session on the future of impact evaluations. So for those interested in methodology, a very interesting session lined up. And then later on in the afternoons, evidence gap maps, lessons and experiences from international development, 3IE session, and one on evidence synthesis initiatives on social accountability and governance, followed by, at the end of the day, innovations in targeting aid and towards developing an evidence architecture for elder abuse. So action-packed. Thank you all again for joining us, and stay tuned for more.
Thank you.
Thank you
And
both
thank
again.
you,
Team
Sarkar,
Carl
for the
and Laden.
presentation.
Thank you. It's great to have you
Thank you.
both. Bye-bye.
Bye.